Hello, I am Thoth Harris, also known as ampersat, like the @ sign. I use that as my YouTube handle. I might change it, I might not, but I like the idea of using the @ sign as my YouTube name. It's a symbol, and I'm fascinated by symbols, as I am fascinated by language and its uses and exploitation and its possibilities for transcendence. So as I said in my previous video where I introduced myself and introduced this series to come, I would like to explore language in a series of videos. And here's where I will get more into this. So let's talk about one of the things I have considered, and that is the idea of place and boundaries and the idea of zeitgeist, like the name I chose for this YouTube channel. I just changed it about 2 days ago or yesterday. I think it was yesterday, actually. I'm losing track of time. But the idea of the @ sign, the @ sign has become so ubiquitous. It's used in tagging people. It's used with emails, so on and so forth. But this idea of atness, placing, labeling, pinning things down like a butterfly in a collection, but not always so derogatory in its implications. So it has this double placement. So symbols so often have this placement, and our memories we pour ourselves into language, and each word that we use is pregnant with, is heavy with all the memories that we have have in our past. So language is almost has the same function as scapegoats, the ritual scapegoats of the past. I hope that is clear. The idea of boundaries. This is interesting. A few months ago, I read the young adult novel Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. The place where the main character, Katniss, lives is full of, like, the very first chapter is full of very vivid descriptions of the places and the boundaries of the world where she lives. So the world building is very clearly drawn out. Here's an example. Separating the meadow from the woods, in fact, enclosing all of District 12, is a high chain link fence topped with barbed wire loops. Already you see we have this almost concentration camp-like environment, these barbed wire fences. In theory, it's supposed to be electrified 24 hours a day as a deterrent to the predators that live in the woods. Packs of wild dogs, lone cougars, bears that used to threaten our streets. But since we're lucky to get 2 or 3 hours of electricity in the evenings, it's usually safe to touch. I always take a moment to listen carefully for the hum that means the fence is live. I'm skipping over some of the words that I'm not really sort of interested in. So I kind of just read out some of the stuff I underlined. Okay, it goes on in the next paragraph. Electrified or not, the fence has been successful at keeping the flesh eaters out of District 12. But there's also food if you know how to find it. My father knew, and he taught me some before he was blown to bits in a mine explosion. There was nothing even to buried. I was 11 then. This child in this story is already living an adult existence, and she's kept in, she's encompassed by constant boundaries and forced to break every sort of fence or boundary she can possibly do as long as she can survive. It's all about survival. We've lost this sort of, not just sort of, we have entirely lost this in our current environment, our current sensibility. I'm just looking at the clock because I will have to finish in about 10 minutes, but so we go on. Most of the peacekeepers turn a blind eye to the few of us who hunt because they're as hungry for fresh meat as anybody is. In fact, they're among our best customers. But the idea that someone might be arming the seam would never have been allowed. So this little girl, she's always out hunting. She sells what she is able to kill. She has a close relationship to death, in the sense of her own death, in that she's very close to her own death each time she might possibly get killed by either the animals or by fences and things like that, but also the animals that she kills. And this is unusual, for obviously it's something that's very unfamiliar to our own world, and we're very alienated from this environment. And now we get to some of the things that are less about landscape, less about the mise en scène. Here are some things about emotional expression. I glance over at Gail's face, still smoldering underneath his stony expression. His rages seem pointless to me, although I never say so. It's not that I don't agree with him. I do. But what good is yelling about the capital in the middle of the woods? It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make things fair. It doesn't fill our stomachs. In fact, it scares off the nearby game. So, language and silence, language of emotion kept in, and exteriorly over-exerted, and then using sound and expression in terms of words and the volume of one's voice. This is the difference between survival and hunger. This might seem completely banal for now, but I'm hoping we can connect this to something further on. You see, our lack of connection to words and our closeness to words makes a big difference. Another book I read a few months ago was another one that's fairly well known. I mean, it was certainly a bestseller. It's Jared Diamond's Upheaval. Now, there are a lot of criticisms I would have about this book, which I won't really go into right now. I won't go into for a while. But there are some aspects that I really found quite fascinating. And since we've been talking about boundaries, the districts in the place where Katniss in Hunger Games, all that sort of world, I think there's a strong anxiety we have about our identity and nationhood or community and that sort of thing. And I'm not necessarily one for pure nationhood as an ideal myself. I would take a more anarchist bent, but it's unrealistic for now. And I would say it's quite possibly far too dangerous for now to let go of the ideal, for the lack of a better word for the moment, ideal. But if you recall, during the pandemic restrictions, let's call them that for now, when people were not allowed to go out at certain times in some places, like Quebec and Canada, at certain times of the day. Australia was extremely restricted. The places where it was most restrictive and most authoritarian, and I would definitely call it authoritarian. There's a lot more I would like to go into, but I want to compress the information I'm trying to get to for the next 5 minutes. You see, the places where this happened most predominantly have a strange quality about them, and some of these places show up in this book. Like, of course, this book was written long before the pandemic and its reactions took place. And if you remember, if you had any sort of sense of this, remember how Germany and Austria reacted to reacted to the virus. In terms of their government response, remember how Austria was even more restrictive than so many other places, and Germany too, to a certain extent, but not quite so drastic as Austria. There were massive protests in the streets. A lot of the media didn't cover it, but if you were in certain Facebook feeds, you would certainly have seen it, and certainly some news sources covered it. Same thing in Belgium, Australia. What do these countries have in common? Also, Quebec, like I mentioned earlier. Quebec's a funny case, though. And the whole Canadian thing is a funny case in itself, too. But actually, the whole of Canada kind of fits the idea that I'm kind of trying to evolve here. And this is the lack of clear nationhood, or the lack of clear identity. That is actually what I'm more concerned with. Like, nationhood is far too fuzzy a concept. I don't know if fuzzy might have too many other implications in terms of possibly physics and whatnot, but I use it more in a prosaic sense. What I think you should take into account here on a very superficial level is, Austria, being the other German-speaking country right next to Germany. Speaking the same language, and you know how European Union itself has this crisis of identity. Another example, like I said earlier, Belgium and France. Again, France has a long-standing tradition, but Belgium is kind of this almost how shall we say, this sibling rivalry in terms of being the less well-known brother or less well-known sister. Australia, being the colony for so long, and it's English-speaking, of course, Canada as well. And then Quebec in itself is this sub-entity as well. So it's this sense of community humiliation, and how boundaries and language are, the word I'm looking for are impotent to truly express the sense of existential contemporary angst. And I hope that this long spiel, this long quasi-lecture I'm giving came across well to you, and I hope you got some idea of what I'm getting at. And this is something I want to get around to writing about in some more detail, and with a little bit of clarity as well. But I like how we're going with this, and I want to continue this way and try to connect these ideas of identity and community impotence and language and boundaries with what's going on with the Great Reset, with authoritarian crackdowns, and electronic surveillance. There's a lot to unravel here, and there's going to be it's going to take quite some time to get into all these complicated issues and put them all together in some sort of in some sort of coherent form, cohesive form as well. With that, I will have to depart because I have to go to work again. So I will see you next video. And for now, I am Thoth Harris, aka Ampersat, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.